Just to stay on kind of some of the effects that capitalism can have on us, it's multifaceted, getting to kind of politics, even how it can affect a democracy, which, as a socialist, I can imagine. I assume I know what your answer will be, but to still pose it to you, what is your campaign's thoughts on money in politics, these big corporate super PACs? APAC is usually the first one that comes to mind, but there's the NRA, other ones. Like, what is the position you hold on big money in politics?
Oh, it's a huge issue. It's one of the biggest issues that we face. And I talked about the big tech corporations earlier. One of those big six is Meta, the company that owns Instagram and Facebook. Meta has created, I believe, 5 super PACs. And in particular, they've created one super PAC that donates exclusively to the campaigns of Republican Party politicians. And they've created another super PAC that donates exclusively to the campaigns of Democratic Party politicians. And so they're putting it very clearly that they think no matter who is in office within the two-party system, they can buy the interests of those politicians and make sure that those politicians are ensuring their ability, the ability of corporations like Meta to make as much of a profit as possible. And if we live in a society where 0.0001% of the population, that's the billionaires, they control as much wealth as the poorest half of us. And the Supreme Court has also decided that money is an expression of free speech in this country. Then by extension, our political process is going to be controlled by the billionaire class. That has a very outsized impact on politics. And we've seen this even in the 2024 election cycle. The billionaire interests spent hundreds of millions of dollars on those elections, again, backing both the Democrats and the Republicans. So I think it's a huge issue. It ensures that the two-party system is in lockstep with the billionaire class, and it's a big reason why we in the PSL think that it's important to build a movement that is independent of the two-party system. Because how could we possibly solve the problems that are caused by capitalism, the problems that are caused by the billionaires, if the political leaders who claim to represent us are funded by the same people who are causing those very problems?
Yeah, I completely agree. And then jumping to foreign policy, I'm really interested to kind of get your position on this because as a fellow leftist, I imagine we agree on most things. There's some things I know me and Claudia disagreed on a few things, so we might have some disagreements, which is also fun to talk about. I'm curious with obviously there's the war in Iran, there's the genocide in Gaza, there's the Russia-Ukraine war. What do you think that U.S. foreign policy should look like? And that's wide ranging, more like, the bases, there's the aid, there's things like NATO. What in the socialist framework that you're running on would these things look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first it's worth grounding ourselves in what the current arrangement of our foreign policy is. And capitalism is not just a domestic system, right? We talked about all the ways that capitalism prioritizes the power and profits of billionaires over the interests of working people here in our country. But they're not just satisfied, those billionaires are not just satisfied with exploiting and dominating workers here in our country. They want to exploit and dominate the entire world. And the politicians who are funded by these billionaires are the ones who implement a foreign policy that does just that. And I think the biggest thing that we have to address is our rampant spending on war and militarism, which is only increasing and has been a bipartisan project over my entire lifetime. You know, Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., he wrote in his last book that a society that spends more on militarism than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. That was in 1967 that he wrote that. And now here we are in 2026, and we've only worsened the problem to the point now where we spend $1 trillion every single year on our military budget. I'm someone who has never seen $1 million in my bank account. A billion is 1,000 millions, and a trillion is 1,000 billions. So that gives you a sense of the scale of how much money we're spending every single year on death and destruction. If you added up countries 2 through 10, we obviously in the United States, we spend the most on our military of any country in the world. If you add up countries 2 through 10 that spend the next most, and you added up all of their military budgets, they would still spend less combined than the United States spends on our military budget. If we cut our military budget by 90%, which is part of our program as well, that would still leave us with the third biggest military budget in the world, but it would open up $900 billion to invest in programs of social uplift instead of in bombing schools and hospitals and cultural sites abroad, which the US military is doing right now in Iran. So I do think we have to look at it as, in a way, a zero-sum game, that all this money that's being invested in death and destruction is not being invested in life here in the United States and all across the world. So that's the biggest thing. And then I think we need to re-examine our relationship with the rest of the world. Our relationship should not actually be based on domination. We should be building relationships of mutual respect and collaboration. In particular, because the biggest problems facing humanity today cannot be solved by just one country. I think the top one is climate change. It can't be something that the United States stakes out on its own. Obviously, the United States has a big role to play in addressing climate change because we contribute so much to the global emissions, and the military in particular is the biggest emitter in the world, the US military. But we can't solve climate change alone. That needs to be a collaborative process throughout humanity. You look at the COVID-19 pandemic, that was something that could have been handled much better here in the United States, but also we could have done much better job coordinating with other countries in addressing that catastrophe, and we could have saved lives here in the United States and all across the world. So I think that is really the key, is understanding that humanity has a common fate in many ways, and that we have a lot in common with the people all across the world. And rather than building quote unquote rules-based international order where the US sets the rules and everybody else follows, we should build a multilateral and collaborative approach to foreign policy, where we understand that we have a lot more to gain from that collaboration than we do with butting heads and with investing so much in war and militarism.
I'm curious then your thoughts on something specifically kind of like NATO or these other kind of alliances, where this is where I feel like we might have a disagreement, because I do think there's plenty of valid critiques, too many bases, like the things you were saying about domination, completely, definitely all true. What do you think there's still, like, in, obviously, let's say America operates under this socialist framework, they start adopting these positions. Do you think there still is a place for something, and it doesn't have to be NATO specifically, but these sort of like unilateral alliances that we're in? Or do you think that we would need to scrap these and kind of start fresh? What would that kind of look like to you?
Yeah, I think that international institutions are very, very important. But I think NATO in particular is an example of a a unilateral institution that is masqueraded as a multilateral institution, meaning that it's really the United States government and military that sets the rules of engagement with NATO and determines the program and the rules for all of the so-called partners. They're really junior partners in NATO. And you understand that NATO was created as a military alliance after World War II to enshrine the United States as the top dog of the military complex throughout the entire world, and the political alignment of the world as well. I was in Dayton last year, which was there's a NATO summit in Dayton that was celebrating the founding of NATO, which happened with well, it was celebrating the Dayton Accords, which had to do with the war on Yugoslavia.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was striking to be in a town like Dayton, where it used to be a manufacturing center in the country. It used to be considered the Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley in terms of the innovation that happened in Dayton and the production and manufacturing. And it's a city now that is almost completely hollowed out. It's had a massive population decline. And it's just ironic to me that in the same amount of time that the United States became the top power in the world and was able to create an institution like NATO, you've had so many cities like Dayton have a decline over that exact same time. So how is it that we've become the largest, most powerful force in the world at a time when the quality of life for people all across this country has declined? I think it's because an institution like NATO is really an expression of that war and militarism, that domination to seek to expand the power of billionaires, rather than a true defensive or multilateral alliance, which is what it's presented as. So I think I mean, if you read the NATO Charter, it's the United States that has the final word on who gets admitted to and who gets kicked out of NATO, and so it's not really a democratic institution at all. I think that multilateral international institutions are very important because we are in an international world. But again, it really does have to be based on, I believe, on collaboration and on a mutual respect and dignity, rather than saying the United States is the top dog, we set the rules, and international democracy is us telling you what we want to happen and you all saying it sounds good.